Welcome to the Strategy and Leadership Podcast, the podcast that brings you practical advice, lessons, and stories from senior leaders and thought leaders from around the world. The Strategy and Leadership Podcast is brought to you by SME Strategy, working with organizations around the world to create and implement their strategic plans. To learn more, visit SMEstrategy.net. And now, your host, Anthony Taylor.
Hey there, folks. Welcome to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. My guest today is Scott McGohan, who is the co-chairman at McGohan Brabender and the author of Culture is an Inside Job. Scott, how's it going today?
It's going great. Hey, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. I thought it was cool. As I told you, you've been working in the same organization for 35 years. You've grown, you've developed, you've done some really cool things. You've written this book. And I know a lot of people talk about culture, but I think that there's something to be said for seeing the various evolutions of it and changes and growth in a business, in an organization, in an organism. But who cares what I think? Tell me a little bit about you. Tell me about your background. Tell me about your experience, and then we'll get into some questions.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks for having me, Scott McGohan. But worked at McGohan Brabender for 35 years. I'm married to a beautiful woman named Lori. We've been married 36 years. She's my best friend. 2 kids, both married, 2 grandkids, and we should have had them first in this planet. This planet would be a lot nicer. Other than that, I'm kind of like on the end of my journey, into my runway. Into my, let's call it last third. What's that going to look like? And who knows what's that going to look like? But I've certainly enjoyed my run here at McGohan Brabender.
That's awesome. Well, I've heard and I've told people that grandkids are the gift you get for not killing your kids. So, there you go. So tell me, 35 years in, 36 years marriage, which we might ask you about there. Tell me what's that work journey been like? 35 years is a long time of history, but tell me, how's your career been?
Yeah, I started off even before we had word processing, right? We didn't have computers, we had typewriters, and my best friend was whiteout. So I've gone all the way from there to, these crazy things we carry in our pockets every day. Was really involved in marketing early on, moved into sales. Then about 25 years ago, my assistant came in my office and said, you have values painted on the wall. You don't exhibit one of them. I have my own set of values. You torque that every day. Today's my last day. So it was a big wake up call in regards to who I was. I was just, honestly, I was very good at sales. So I was a chameleon. I had a mask for work, a mask for home, a mask for church, a mask for a golf course. And I was just a lost little kid, who, tried to fill his life full of cars and homes and stuff and sales, and was successful. Made a deal with her that I would hire a coach, and we had access to that coach together. And we would ask each other 3 questions every day. Am I okay? Are you okay? Are we okay? And that really gave me the chance to maybe look at the gift of self-awareness, the gift of emotional intelligence. And honestly, today I can look back and say that, the mirror is a wonderful place to find a friend. And if you're not kind to yourself, it's hard to be kind to others. You can't encourage yourself, can't encourage others. And so, by the grace of God, she retired her last year after 25 years of being here. I got to wheel her out on these big carts that we have at McGohan Brabender. We call them victory carts. We wheel people around, ring a bell, and we celebrate. And so I got to wheel her to the front seat of her car for her last day of work here at MB. So she was my truth teller. She woke me up, and she was brave enough to have that conversation. So
that's awesome. Well, I think it's so interesting. So first, when you do your cart ceremony, let me know, and if I got an invite, I'd love to come down. But what I found interesting, we started today's conversation, you talked about the tools. You're like, hey, word processing and whiteout, and then really looking at saying, hey, one of the things that was the big difference in terms of work performance was the walking the walk, and the challenge of a person that you guys obviously had enough trust for that person to call you out on your. And then you kind of talked about your own personal ability to call yourself out. And I think it's challenging for certain leaders who have this desire and need to not protect themselves, but you're in a position of power. You want to look good. You want to look like you have it all together. And sometimes you can be the kind of leader that is authoritative and blasting, and it's everybody else's problem. And one of the formative things that I heard was, you had two people that told you what was what. You had this assistant that said, "Hey, you're not really practicing what you preach." And then you had yourself, and you had to look and say, "Hey, am I the kind of leader? Am I the kind of human being in my communities that I want to be?" And it sounds like both of those things took you on a journey of, self-reflection and growth. Do I have most of that correct?
Yeah, I think every organization has one of me in it. They're called destructive heroes. So
Okay.
they're people that are very successful, probably good at sales, managing big accounts, or like a founder's kid, like almost like an untouchable.
Hmm.
And I will, I'll tell your listeners too that redemption's available and restoration's available, but they're costing your organization a ton of money, more than you ever think. And if you add up all the time you spend talking about this individual, add up all the salaries that are involved in that conversation, and then add up all the people that you had to zip in body bags because of that person, it's costing your organization a ton of money. But the worst thing is, as business leaders, what you allow in your organization, you actually encourage. So you're actually tolerating it. You're not tolerating it. You're actually encouraging that behavior, which is doubling down on dysfunction. Does that make sense?
I'm literally got some folks I'm going to send that clip to in 2 seconds. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that people tend to kind of, they only think of the upside of that person. And what I was sharing to that exact point, and so it sounds like you are one of those people, was that, but there's the multiplier. You see it as a 1-to-1. It's like this person brings in a bunch of money, but they're hard to replace, blah, blah, blah. But like, what is the multiplier of the people that are left in body bags and the putting a lid on the people that are around? So I guess what I hear is you are one of those people, you reflected on it, but then I also imagine that in your leadership, you were on either maybe on the lookout for those people, or at least
Oh
you're
yeah.
acutely aware of how to support them. So tell me, in your experience, I won't say how did you deal with yourself, but how do you handle those conversations in an organization, especially when they're high performers?
Yeah, I think adults are a lot more like kids than we think. Is most people often do what they see, not what they hear. So inside of an organization, I think everyone wants a good culture. And the reason that I believe that culture is an inside job is because I believe it belongs on the inside of us.
Hmm.
Well, you can fake it till you make it, or all of those things. But if you don't know who you are, then you should probably buy yourself a helmet and everyone you care about a helmet, because life's just going to get hard fast. But as a leader, your job is to make sure that that behavior for the entity, for the organization, is alive and well. And if it's not, you got to call that out. You just got to call that out. And if you can do that with truth and grace at the same time, because truth with no grace is mean, and grace with no truth is meaningless.
Hmm.
And so, as a leader, how do you bring that to life in a compelling way to let other people know? Because, like a new hire walks into a building, there's two questions they're going to ask themselves. And it's not in your manual, it's not in your employee handbook, but they're walking around and they're navigating. How do I get in trouble around here? Number one. And then number two, how do I get rewarded? And we don't tell them any of that, but they see that with their eyeballs and they hear it with their ears. And if that's wonky, then your culture is wonky. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And I think it's just interesting that, well, does the organization, so when we do strategic planning sessions, we talk about, hey, values and scorecards, like talk about the goals. And so that is the explicit way of saying, like, hey, here's the manual, here's how you get rewarded, here's how you stay out of trouble. And even if you don't have that, even if you do have that, there's still stuff that people catch. It's the stuff on the shop floor. It's those side conversations. It's the, people being mean to each other. It's like, yeah, that's the behavior that you're watching it in practice versus on paper. So absolutely. And I wanted to get that on a t-shirt, the truth, and what was the other thing?
Truth and grace. Truth
Truth
with
and
no
grace.
grace is mean, and grace with no truth is meaningless. So
I assert that both of those, truth and grace, they're tools. right? They're tools that you learn to wield, to use effectively. Because some people are really, can just drop truth bombs, but really they're just being jerks. And some people are just, Minnesota nice and don't actually move anything forward. So I look at that and I say, hey, how does a leader develop that? And then I also want to kind of parallel that or combine that with the idea of vulnerability, because you've been extremely vulnerable in this podcast. You're very truthful in saying, where you're at. And we talked about, leaders' aversion, new leaders' potential aversion to vulnerability. So how does being vulnerable and understanding oneself coincide with the ability to use truth and grace effectively within an organization in your eyes?
Yeah, great question. I think outside of curiosity, vulnerability might be the second greatest gift that we have inside of organizations. I had an employee come up to me one time. She said, "You're way too vulnerable. It makes you look weak." And I said, "That's actually the weakest thing I've ever heard." And then they said, "I don't understand." And I said, "I didn't think you would." And then they said, "Will you explain it to me?" And I'm like, "Not today, maybe tomorrow. I'm going to let you just sit in that little mess." Now, here's what I know, because I know who I was, is I was a lost, tired, lonely, broken, scared little boy who I thought self-worth equaled performance plus the opinions of others. So in other words, your opinion of me meant more than my own opinion of myself. And then when I got to restore maybe who I was, I became like self-aware in regards to my relationship with myself. And then I got to take my past and kind of open that up. And now I can use my past, not to torture myself, but to be useful to other people. I'm getting to answer your question because this is what I know. Inside of an organization, everybody comes to work with miscarriage, financial fear, bad marriages, kids getting bullied at school, taking care of elderly parents. And some employers think that people leave that at home. They don't leave it at home. It shows up in our pockets, shows up in our facial expression. And then when we're vulnerable and we let other people know that where we've struggled in our lives, it lets other people know they're not alone. They're not alone. And who knows? I heard a long time ago that life's a wonderful teacher and she rarely gets an apple on her desk. So when you're vulnerable, you can hand apples to people. And maybe by the grace of God, they don't have to take a bite out of it, right? Because I'm 58 years old. Like, I've made a ton of mistakes, but I'm also proud of many things in my career. But I do know this: I'm more useful when I can share where I made my mistakes versus my successes in life. Yeah. So I think it's a great gift. And there's people that are afraid of it. Then you should probably look inside yourself because you're probably afraid. Does that make sense?
100%. So there's a great guest that I had, Daryl Stickle, who talks about trust, and trust is like when you give space to somebody else. And watch it because I can't even capture half the things they said. It was so golden. But one of the things from you is saying don't take your past and put it into your future in terms of relationships. I really like that. With that person's perspective on vulnerability was more of a reflection of them than it is of you, and that their perspective of you is not going to impact your perspective of yourself. And Deion Sanders recently had a good media quote about that. And there was one other piece of it. Oh, COVID, or during the COVID times. I think that shined a light onto people's balance of personal and work, because you had their personal, before they put this filter on and before people knew what was going on, they had their messy bedrooms. There's kids running around. They were exhausted. That was life. And I think that the benefit of that new work from home showed the humanity. And I think that in corporate America generally might not want the reality of what is humanity to show up in our work. But I believe, going from boardroom to boardroom, that you can't unsee that. So it sounds like one of the core principles of how you operate is that the humanity is you are the human in your work, not the other way around.
100%. 100%.
Cool. So you've got the book, Culture's Inside Job. You've got the tail end of your career, at least for now, until you decide to do what you do. What are your lists of priorities right now? What are some of the things that you're challenging yourself with? What do you want to take on over the next little while that you're looking forward to?
I think for me, one is, my wife's followed me for, a third of my life. And it's, hey, like, what do you want to do? I'll follow you, outside of ballroom dancing. And then I've got a deep passion for mental health and substance abuse. And those people that just struggle, who are lonely, tired, broken, and afraid. And where can I be useful and helpful for that population? And then outside of that, I mean, I like golf, but I'm not going to, shoot me now. I'm not going to play golf every day. And you know what? And this world does not end well with me, nothing to do. It's unsafe for humanity.
Well, you are a destructive hero, so we got to make sure that we put that energy to a right place. Cool. Well, that's exciting. Well, let's say, just as we finish up here, that we got a new leader listening to our podcast for the first time, and they're saying, "Oh my gosh, this guy, he's been in a company for so long. He's climbed the corporate ladder. He's done all that stuff." What are 2 or 3 either lessons that you learned, or pieces of advice that you would give to that new leader to help them be as successful in their role, but also successful as a human being? And as somebody 36 years of marriage, also, congratulations on that. What are the pieces of advice that you would give to that person today? And then we'll finish up.
Yeah, great. Probably, just engulf yourself in anything in regards to emotional intelligence. Read, listen to podcasts, listen to books. I don't think it can be AI can't fix that. I think, body language, tone, nonverbal communication, empathy, all of those things. When you build that skill set, it's transferable everywhere. But most importantly, I would say for young people is lead until someone tells you not to. No one's going to tell you not to. Everybody wants to be led. But you can't lead people farther than you've led yourself. So if you work on yourself and you're vulnerable and you got the courage to stand up and make a call, other people want to follow you. And great leaders create followers, not fans. If you're doing it for applause, buy a helmet, because you're going to get hit hard. But if you're doing it for the right reasons, for the right motives, man, like, hey, the world's yours. So have fun.
That's awesome. Well, I think a bonus 4th one is buy a helmet, no matter what, because one way or the other, you're going to take some bumps and take some lessons and learn. But that was appreciated. Scott, where can people get your book? Where can they connect with you? And if they represent an organization that's doing great with substance abuse, either in the Ohio or greater area, where can they connect with you?
Yeah, I've got, on LinkedIn, Scott McGohan, Instagram. My name is spelled McGohan. So most is WAN. So it's HAN. The book's on Amazon. You can go there. And then my email address is scottmcgohan@gmail.com. So.
Right. No W. I love it. See, transparency. That's how you get a whole of people. So, Scott, thank you for chatting with me today. Thanks for sharing with your life. I just, congratulations on an amazing life and career in that order. I wish you nothing but the best moving forward, and just congrats on the book. It sounds like an awesome thing, and a life's work well written. So good job.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for everything you do too.
Great. It's my pleasure. Awesome. Thank you, sir. Folks, my guest today, Scott McGohan. One of the things that I really take away from that is you can't lead people further than how you lead yourself. Be watching out for those disruptive heroes and recognizing that there is the cost there, and it's cumulative, and it's kind of crazy. And they're just there's no downside to transparency. If you're afraid of it, it might, but it opens up the upside of it. I think creates unimaginable positivity that you don't know what's behind that door till you open it, but it takes a lot of risk and it takes a lot of heart to get there. Check him out, connect with him, get his book. Culture is an Inside Job. Scott, I appreciate you being here. Thanks for the time. And folks, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for sharing. Thanks for doing whatever you do. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And if you enjoyed today's episode, please consider giving us a review. We appreciate you listening and following along, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And as Anthony says, until next time.